It really is great to have these 2 days with all of you to discuss common approaches to shared problems. And it is clear that our economies, north and south, are interlinked and indeed interdependent. The economic downturn and the recession hit families and businesses right across the island of Ireland, and every one of Ireland's 32 counties. And of course, we in Sinn Féin have a common approach to these problems. We need investment to create jobs and to grow the economy, and we must safeguard the needs of those who are the most vulnerable within our society. Today, families and communities across this island continue to face economic hardship and inequality. And these are common problems facing all of us across the island. Austerity and cuts to public services are at the heart of many of the problems that we face. And Sinn Féin is against austerity north and south. And we believe that the policy of attacking the least able to pay is fundamentally wrong. That is why we are against the welfare cuts that the British Tory party want to introduce in the north. And so far, we have been able to protect citizens from the worst effects of their despicable, selfish policies. Important to remember that not one person in the north voted for these vicious cuts. No one in the north of Ireland voted for those Tory politicians who are driving this agenda. In this state, the social consequences of austerity are evident everywhere. The ongoing destruction of our health services, the imposition of water charges, the family home tax and the removal of protection for working families, senior citizens, cuts to child benefit, carers allowance, the appalling increase of poverty, wholesale unemployment and mass emigration. The one thing that should unite the Northern Executive is the defence and protection of those who need the support and help of wider society. Since the Tory-led coalition came to power, there has been a sustained and systematic, even systemic assault on public services and the very concept of the welfare state. The money allocated to the executive has remained static year on year. In the context of inflation, increasing wages and rising costs, this means a real cut in public spending every year. Next year, and I had a meeting last week with our financial people alongside Peter Robinson, we were told that we are facing into a £500 million reduction, a £500 million reduction, which will have a devastating effect on our public services. None of the policies of the Tory-led coalition takes any account whatsoever of the unique challenges facing the north of Ireland as a society emerging from conflict with higher levels of deprivation, higher living costs and greater dependence on the public sector. The Tory-led government in London are demanding that we now cut the income of the poorest in our society, while their rich backers continue to avoid and evade taxes, and the bankers who created the economic crisis continue to enjoy obscenely large bonuses. Over the summer, we've heard a great deal of commentary about the consequences of not legislating for the benefits cuts demanded by this British government agenda. Let's be clear, these proposals will not create one job, but will force thousands of families into greater poverty. The advocates of Tory cuts have been less than vocal when it comes to the consequences for their own constituents, individuals, families and communities who will lose money if these cuts were implemented. As is the case under Fine Gael and Labour, the people who will lose money if the vicious Tory welfare cuts are implemented are the least well off in our society. People with disabilities, low-income workers, the vulnerable and the unemployed. People who are already on the poverty line would lose even further as a result of the decisions made by Tory millionaires in government in London. Our colleagues in government, the DUP, are demanding that we implement this British government policy, the sole purpose of which is to save money at the expense of the poor, of people with disabilities and the most vulnerable in our society. And again, not one vote was cast in the north of Ireland for those who make up the Tory-led coalition in London. We didn't vote for welfare cuts. Cuts in welfare payments are not part of the programme for government that I agreed with Peter Robinson and other leaders. And it's also important to remember, and sometimes the media can be very lazy about this, the Tory cuts on welfare came after we put the programme for government together. That is a totally ridiculous and unsustainable position for any government, particularly of the nature of the government that we have, to move forward on. So these were a hammer blow, which would, in my opinion, undermine all of the anti-poverty measures that we are committed to in our programme for government. It is a right-wing Conservative agenda. It's a policy designed by millionaires in London who know nothing about surviving on a low income and who care even less for those who do. It's a policy supported by politicians in the Assembly who also know little about how to survive on a low income. And I believe that these Tory cuts are the antithesis of a caring, modern society who should protect its most vulnerable. In the Tory world, the rich continue to get richer and the poor continue to pay the price. In this Tory world, people claiming benefits are targeted, while billions of pounds are denied to the public purse through tax avoidance and tax evasion by the rich friends of the Tory party. So the Tory welfare programme is not about reform. It's about saving money at the expense of the poor. It's a Thatcherite agenda designed to dismantle the welfare state and punish the poorest and most disadvantaged in society. And of course, anybody listening to the news knows that in Britain, the welfare system is in disarray and the cause of growing division and dissension within the coalition government. Recently, in the context of the Scottish referendum debate, it was interesting to hear Alistair Darling, when he was asked about the Tory welfare cuts, declared his opposition to them. So I believe that any decision by the Assembly on welfare cuts must be informed by the reality that a British general election might fundamentally change the British government's approach to the welfare state, or indeed in advance of the Scottish referendum, which will, whatever its outcome, change fundamentally the welfare and fiscal agenda for all of us. The reality is that in Britain, people have died as a result of these cuts. Like many people in this state, others have been forced into homelessness, poverty, desperation, and, sadly, in some cases, suicide. So the DUP needs to tell people, including many of their own voters, what they are facing into if welfare cuts are implemented. For example, in Britain by 2015, child benefit cuts will affect 7.5 million households, who will lose an average of £370 per year. Cuts to child benefit will force more children into poverty. In Britain, 500,000 people with disabilities will have their income reduced by an average of £3,000 per year, forcing already vulnerable and disadvantaged individuals into greater hardship and suffering. These are the real human consequences of welfare cuts, and Sinn Féin is totally opposed to this agenda. We believe that the Assembly and the Executive should take our own decisions in these matters. We believe the Assembly and the Executive should have the power and the responsibility, and not just the responsibility. The DUP, in contrast, have accepted this anti-working class agenda. Indeed, many in that party share the right-wing Conservative ideology of the British Tory party. So let me be absolutely clear today so that David Cameron and his supporters in the Unionist parties understand fully my position. Sinn Féin is absolute in our opposition to welfare cuts, north and south of the border. We have attempted to persuade the other executive parties to unite against these Tory cuts and to join with us in demanding the right to design a system which meets our needs and is now being promised to the people in Scotland. It is our primary duty to protect the most vulnerable in our society. So this is about choices for all the parties in the Assembly. I believe we do have a choice. In Sinn Féin, we have made our choice. We reject this attack on the poor, people with disabilities, and the most vulnerable in our society. And we will defend and stand with the working class communities that the Tories are now targeting. If for ideological reasons or an attempt to curry favour with the Tories, the DUP wish to inflict these devastating cuts on working class unionists as well as the rest of us, then they can and should bring the legislation onto the floor of the Assembly. This is not the first time I've said this. I've said this to Peter Robinson and to others in the course of recent times. If people are serious about dealing with this matter, bring it. Bring the bill. Let Elsa McCausland bring his bill to the floor of the Assembly, where the elected representatives of the people can debate it and vote on it. That's what the Assembly is for. That's the democratic thing to do. If he refuses, on behalf of the DUP, to bring it to the floor of the Assembly, then the only other option, in my view, is to put it directly to the people in an election. One thing the DUP should be aware of: we in Sinn Féin have absolutely no fear of fighting an election on this issue. DUP have, of course, thrown up this issue in recent weeks, and I believe, and many others believe, it's a smokescreen for the real threat to the institutions that results from the anti-agreement axis which emerged as a result of the failure of the DUP to show positive leadership. This anti-agreement axis is opposed to inclusive, peaceful progress and the requirement for parity of esteem, mutual respect and reconciliation. Earlier this week, the DUP asserted that we need a new negotiation. I think Peter actually used the term that the executive of the Assembly wasn't fit for purpose. Well, also for the benefit of lazy journalists and commentators, when Peter said that, he said that as leader of the DUP. He didn't say it with the authority of the office of First and Deputy First Minister, because I don't agree with him. If anyone is not fit for purpose, it's those people within the institutions who are not prepared to stand by even the very institutions that they negotiated as a result of our discussions at St Andrews some years ago. So it's important, I think, to point that out. So we've always been in favour of negotiations. Right throughout the course of the last year, we've been calling for negotiations. We've been making it clear that negotiations should be convened immediately by the two governments with the support and assistance of the US administration. The context must and will be the Good Friday Agreement, which the Irish people democratically endorsed. And in any negotiations, we will defend that agreement, and we will defend the institutions that flowed from it. The reality is that political unionism and the DUP have repeatedly walked away from negotiations, and they've also repeatedly walked away from agreements made. They reneged on the agreement on the development of the Maze Long Cache site, commitment in the programme for government. And Unionists collectively rejected the democratic decision of Belfast City Council on the flying of the Union flag, largely directed at the Alliance Party and the police, and Unionist leaders refused to stand shoulder to shoulder with me in condemning these loyalist protests and the accompanying violence, as I had done with them in condemning the violence involved by dissident Republicans. They rejected the Haas-O'Sullivan proposals and then walked out of the party leaders' talks because the Orange Order did not get its way in North Belfast, and also because they were not prepared to accept a Parades Commission determination. So they refused to accept lawful determinations of the Parades Commission, established by the very Parliament that they claim loyalty towards. The Health Minister questions the independence and impartiality of the justice system because he didn't get the outcome that he wants, a ban on gay men donating blood. All of this, in my view, demonstrates a dubious and questionable commitment by Unionist leaders to negotiations, agreement and to democratic decision making. As I have said previously, we are in government with our Unionist colleagues because we want to be. They're not in government with us because they want to be. It's quite clear that they're only in government with us because they have to be. Republicans have long recognised that negotiations and agreement require compromise in the best interests of all of our people. Progress requires reconciliation, and a willingness to respect our different political perspectives and beliefs. And I have attempted, and this was difficult for some Republicans, but I have attempted to reach out to the Unionist population, not least in my engagements with Queen Elizabeth. I done an interview recently with Mark Carruthers of the BBC, which will be on BBC Radio 4 sometime in October, I'm told. And I said in that interview, and I say it again now, that in the aftermath of those 3 engagements with Queen Elizabeth, not one Unionist politician said to me that that was a good thing to do. Yet I meet many people from within the Unionist Protestant community who regularly come up to me and say that they believe that it was a good thing to do. And I think that says it all. The fact also is that there's been little reciprocation from the leadership of unionism. Unionist leaders, I think, have singularly failed to reach out or to recognise and accept the validity of nationalist and republican perspectives, narratives and aspirations. Unionist politicians routinely excuse, and it has to be said, they defend racism, sectarianism and homophobia. Racism, sectarianism and homophobia are totally and wholly unacceptable. In stark contrast, and I think I can say without any fear of contradiction, that Sinn Féin has genuinely engaged in the process of reconciliation. People can look at our track record and all of that, and way back to Alec Maskey and many other initiatives that have been taken. And we've also stood by and delivered on all of the agreements that we've entered into, from Good Friday to the Hillsborough Agreement and the various programmes for government agreed by the Executive. So the difficulties in the institutions arise from the refusal of unionist leaders to engage in dialogue around difficult issues and from the failure to honour agreements reached. But more fundamentally damaging is the totally unrealistic desire of a section of political unionism to turn the clock back, to end power sharing and to undermine the evolving equality agenda. This is nothing short of delusional. Why is that? Because there will be no return to the failures of the past. Unfortunately, negative unionism has been encouraged in this view by a Tory-led government that has itself failed to deliver on commitments and agreements made, including Act na Gaeilge and the Bill of Rights, and it's failed also to support the Haas-O'Sullivan proposals. This, and of course the courting of DUP MPs by the Tory leadership at Westminster, has encouraged and deepened unionist intransigence and moved unionism, I believe, politically to the right. It has become apparent that this British government has become a big, big part of the problem. This refusal by Downing Street to fulfil its obligation highlights the urgent need for the Taoiseach to hold the British government to account. And I'm very pleased to hear, just on my way in here, that there has been a tweet this morning that indicates that the Taoiseach has said that talks will take place very soon and that the Irish government will be involved. And why is that important? Because it is important that the Taoiseach holds the British government to account. But the Irish government is co-equal guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement and subsequent agreements. And the Taoiseach needs to be a champion for the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. The DUP claim that the institutions are not fit for purpose. Well, I believe the institutions are fit for purpose. I do believe that the responsibility to work those institutions in a positive and constructive spirit rests with all of the politicians in the Assembly and in the Executive. So I let the public judge which politicians are fit for purpose and which politicians aren't. Just as unionists were not fit for purpose in 50 years of sectarian and one-party rule. So the days of repression, inequality and discrimination are gone forever. The picture I paint here may seem to be a bleak one, but it need not be so. Everyone needs to appreciate the distance we have travelled out of conflict building peace is a process, and the journey isn't over yet. But I do retain great hope for the future. Political unionism may be sleepwalking into a crisis, but civic unionism, the business sector, the voluntary and community sector value the work that has been done, and I think they are focused on the future. And that is Sinn Féin's focus also. Whatever the current challenges and problems, they can, I believe, and will be overcome. So we are up for negotiations. We are willing to work with all of the parties and the two governments to address outstanding issues and to build a process of reconciliation based on mutual respect. I firmly believe that all the problems we face are surmountable, that given the political will, they can be resolved. So for us, there's no going backwards. The way forward for all in our society is inclusion, it's about equality, and it's about power sharing. So we can be very proud of our contribution to this process over many decades. There are still huge challenges ahead. I believe that we're a party fit for purpose, up for the challenges, and ready to face into a very serious negotiation about the future of not just the political process, but the process of reconciliation, which all politicians need to recognise has to be engaged in. And that will only happen if there is a genuine commitment from both governments to be part of that. And I say that knowing that this isn't dealing with the Blair government that we dealt with and played, I think, a positive role in our peace process, or the Bertie Ahern and Albert Reynolds period, where also people recognised that the vision was one of peace and of the prospect of a real reconciliation leading to what is our primary political objective, and that is undoubtedly the peaceful and democratic reunification of our country. That's still our task. We're up for it, and we'll see what happens in the time ahead. Gormila, Mila Margaret.